Hi. Just a quick note before you watch or listen to this podcast. There were one or two, well, actually one technical glitch. I'm told that fairly early on my camera froze. I was completely unaware of this, and I think the participants were too polite to mention it to me, and I just carried on blithely. So if you wonder why I've suddenly stopped moving, it's not because I've passed out. It's because technology got in the way. So anyway, I'll leave you to enjoy the podcast. Thanks very much. Hello. Yes, we're back with another episode of Rare Together, the podcast series from LDA Research that explores what it's really like to live with a rare disease. As usual, I'm your host, Andrew Grant, and today we have two new guests who very kindly agreed to share their experiences. So let me introduce you to them. First of all the way from Lund, down on the southern tip of Sweden, we have Milla. Hello, Milla. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Excellent. We're pleased to have you with us. And also joining us, we have Milly. It's rather confusing. We have Milla and Milly, but we have Milly, who is calling in from East London here in the UK. Hi, Milly. How's it going?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you.
Welcome very much to both of you. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us. And what I'd like to do first is find out a little bit more about both of you. Let me start with you, Milla. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your home situation, and tell us about the conditions that you suffer from, please?
Okay, yes. So I'm Milla. I'm 21 years old, and I live just outside of Lund, which is sort of a reasonably small university town in southern Sweden. I live with my parents at the moment, and well, on my free time, I love making music and writing songs and that stuff, but I'm also a full-time university student. So I am an occupational therapy student. I'm not an occupational therapist, and right now I'm speaking as a person who has been diagnosed with multiple disabilities, but I have a rare eye disorder called Leber's congenital amaurosis. I've also been diagnosed with autism and ADHD, so I'm neurodivergent as well. But the Leber's congenital amaurosis, or LCA for short, it kind of falls under the umbrella of retinitis pigmentosa. So the classical form of RP, you might be born with very good vision and then you will eventually lose a lot of eyesight. But the type that I have, it's not progressive because I was born with such extensive damage that I was born completely blind. So I don't know what it's like to grieve for something because I never had eyesight. So in that aspect, I consider myself quite lucky.
Right, I understand. That's really interesting. You also mentioned that, did you say that you'd been diagnosed with a couple of other conditions as well recently?
Yes. So the year I turned 18, so that was 2020, I was diagnosed with autism and ADHD, which was a roller coaster because when I was 8 years old, I was listening to a TV interview with a child who had a very severe case of ADHD. He was like breaking stuff in his house. And I remember that I thought, I think I've got ADHD because I recognize myself. And I didn't understand very much about ADHD, but, I was 8 years old, but years went on and I learned even more of like the symptoms and the sort of the procrastination, the issues with starting and ending projects. I recognized myself more and more as time went on, and I learned more about ADHD and autism as well. I had a child in my homeroom who back then we were told he had ADHD and Asperger's. Now Asperger's is sort of an outdated term. It's not really something people are diagnosed with anymore because it falls under the umbrella of autism. But I recognized myself in that boy because he had meltdowns that were quite scary. He had the sort of screaming fits when he was overwhelmed and stuff. And I had a lot of what I now recognize as meltdowns, but I was also bullied in school. So a lot of it was my environment that wasn't really very good.
Right, I understand. Okay, thank you for that. Let me come over to you, Milly. So again, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about the conditions that you suffer from, please.
Absolutely. So, as I said, my name is Milly. So, I live in London, in East London, in Walthamstow. I'm 38 and I have my own business, which is a consultancy that works with very early stage companies. I do strategy and operations for early stage businesses. So, generally working with founders that can't access lots of funding because of demographics. A lot of funding goes to male-led businesses, for example. So I work with a lot of female-led businesses, a lot of businesses that are spinning out of universities, all kinds of interesting projects. But I help them get set up and help them get on the path to growing. So my primary condition is a neurological disability. So I have a form of chronic migraine. I think it's about 2% of the population have a chronic form of migraine. So that's more than 5 days of the pain phase of a migraine. There are 4 phases to a migraine. So more than 15 days per month of the pain phase is chronic. And we're working under the belief that it's a particular type of chronic migraine that's called sporadic hemiplegic migraine. There's not really any specific test for hemiplegic migraine. There is a gene variant that's known to have it, but a very small percentage of people that have hemiplegic migraine actually have that gene. If they don't have the gene, it's known as a sporadic occurrence of it. And so I have a variety of different symptoms because of migraine. So I think a lot of people associate migraine with the pain. If you say, I have a migraine, people think you have a headache. Migraine is actually a variety of different symptoms. So I have a lot of issues with my vision, with speech. I have aura, which is like a visual hallucination that comes at certain stages of the cycle. I get very tired, very uncomfortable. I have a lot of pain and weakness on one side of my body. And then alongside migraine, I, like Milla, unfortunately have a bunch of different disabilities. So I also have Lipoedema. It's about 1 in 10 women have Lipoedema. That's a condition that causes some of your fat cells to take on water and swell up, and you can't do anything about it. So you can't lose weight. You just swell until you become too disfigured. I was luckily able to afford surgery for it twice last year. And then I was recently diagnosed with Postural Tachycardia Syndrome, POTS. I think that's something about 0.2% of people have POTS. So POTS is a condition that causes my heart rate to shoot up when I stand up and my blood pressure to drop. So I pass out a lot. My house is covered in soft furnishings. And then I also get ice pick headaches and visual snow syndrome. So visual snow syndrome is a condition that causes a lot of floating lights, flashing and black dots in my eyes. It's not similar to retinosis pigmentosa, although that does actually run in my family, interestingly, but I don't have it. So a variety of different interesting conditions.
Right, understood. Thanks for that. Thanks for that summary. Yeah. So, have the things that you mentioned, have some of those occurred more recently?
Yes. So I was first diagnosed with migraine symptoms in 1988. So I was about 3. The lipedema generally starts, it's predominantly women who suffer from it. It generally starts around the onset of puberty, so around 12, 13-ish. But POTS, I have only been officially diagnosed earlier this year, but I have to wait for an appointment at the autonomic clinic, which I can't get until October, which will be like the fuller definition of that diagnosis. So yeah, some of them I've been living with my entire life, and then some I've been living for most of my life, and then the POTS is a much more recent thing.
Right, understood. We'll come on to impact on your life in a second. In fact, I just want to come back to Milla. So, it sounds like an obvious question because you can't see. But how has your condition affected your life? Do you think how would life be different for you if you didn't have your condition?
Of course, I cannot drive, and I have, it's called färdtjänst, which is like paratransit services. It's a taxi that takes me to and from university. My kitchen's not really accessible to me because the stove, there's no way for me to know where to put pots and the pans because it's not marked anywhere. So there's a lot of microwave stuff in my home. I use Braille. And I use a lot of technology with voice synthesizers on my computers and on my phone. a lot of materials that you get from university is not really accessible to me because the voiceover won't read it. Blindness is just pervasive, I think.
Yes. Actually, one thing I wanted to pick up on, one thing that you said when you were younger, you said you were bullied at school. Was that as a result of your condition, do you think, or were you simply unfortunate in that respect?
Unfortunately, a lot of people who have disabilities are bullied as a result of their disability. I don't know if that's the case for me, but I couldn't really read social rules. And I don't know how much that's neurodiversity or how much it's blindness, but because, I don't see facial expressions. So that can also play a role into why I couldn't really read social rules. A lot of it, I think it's a combination, because a lot of my reactions to my school experience, I had a lot of panic attacks. I had a lot of mental health issues that were sort of swept under the rug because you're just blind. It's nothing to worry about. That sort of plays into it that I think has not so much to do with my blindness. And a lot of the time I was sort of dismissed by adults around me that, no, you don't have that problem. Your psychiatric issues are just because you're blind. And I don't think that's always the case.
I understand. Yeah. No. And in fact, I'm going to come to you, Milly, now, because I know one of the things that you feel is that as a woman, you haven't necessarily received the care that you might have done if you'd been male. I know that's something that you feel quite strongly, so I'd be really interested to hear some thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunately quite common for women to have their health concerns dismissed by, not just by, male practitioners. I think there's a lot of women, female doctors that have a huge amount of internalized misogyny that causes us to treat women very differently to the way that we treat men when it comes to things like this. I've had a lot of issues trying to advocate for myself to get the sorts of treatment that I need. And not only is a lot of the specialist treatment for chronic migraine conditions just not available on the NHS because of funding, a lot of it is a postcode lottery. But yeah, having to advocate for myself and explaining, my pain is real and I'm not just overreacting to things. I think it's, it's a classic statement that, men can react to things, women can only overreact to things. And I think when you have a condition like mine, and, interestingly, to some of Milla's points, I've been told by people who have neurodivergence that the way that my senses work because of the migraine condition can be quite similar to neurodivergent conditions. Like everything is too bright for me. It's too loud for me. It's too much. Like if I'm in a social situation, the lights will always be too bright, or I'll have to move where I'm sitting because there'll be a slightly broken flickering light bulb, and that's just going to cause me a whole host of pain. And I get very frequently dismissed for those needs. I don't know whether that's being a woman or if that is just how people treat invisible disabilities in general. But it's a classic issue that women face. But I've been sexually harassed by doctors that I've had to continue working with because they were the only ones that would offer the treatment that I needed at a price point that I could afford it when I couldn't get it on the NHS. And there's nothing quite like having to force yourself to go down into the basement office of a doctor to have him creep all over you, knowing that that's all that the only option that you have to get rid of some of the pain that you're feeling. I can't imagine the same thing would be said for a man in that exact situation that I was in. So yeah, I think there are a lot of issues that broadly impact people with invisible disabilities, but also specifically women with disabilities like mine.
So let me come back to you, Milla. You heard what Milly said. Have you felt at all that don't get the right responses because you're female?
I don't know. No, I don't think so. Not to that extent. And I should mention that I don't experience chronic pain. And I don't experience, many sort of physically uncomfortable symptoms. But I have been dismissed. Yes. And should also mention, Milly, that I'm terribly sorry that your doctors have treated you that way. It's just awful.
Thank you so much for saying that. That means a lot to me, especially from someone who understands the situation, having, as you said, I'm sorry that you were dismissed by people that were meant to be helping you, or, even generally by society. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. But the thing about my being dismissed, I think a lot of it was related to medical trauma. So I was diagnosed as an infant. And I don't remember being diagnosed with my eye condition, but my parents for a while thought, the doctors around my parents thought I might have some serious brain condition, and that's the reason that I'm blind. Like maybe I had a brain tumor, maybe I had hydrocephalus, I don't know. So there was a lot of tests done, and when it was determined that I had an eye condition and it didn't affect any of my vital organs, then that was, I think, something that my parents held on to, and I have a lot of compassion for my parents. But I think a lot of it was the trauma that my parents experienced. I think also formed the way that they looked at my other problems that were a little more psychiatric in nature.
How do you mean?
When I was, 8, 9, 10, and I talked about maybe having ADHD, my parents would say, no, you just have LCA. And that felt a little hard to hear because I knew that I had problems just beyond being blind. And I went for a decade from when I was 8, and I saw that first TV interview with that kid with ADHD until I was 18. And I went, because my parents, they said that now you have to wait until you're 18 to get assessed. And I remember that when I was 18, I had pretty much forgotten, because I turned 18 in 2020 and a lot of other things happened in 2020. So I was thinking about quarantine and social distancing and all of that. And I had forgotten about everything else in my life. And when I was talking to my aunt, her child had been diagnosed with ADHD. And she not so subtly asked me, Milla, have you thought about ever getting assessed for ADHD? And I was like, yeah. And so that's the year I was diagnosed.
Nice, understood. Yeah, that must have been frustrating when you felt that people weren't, even the people closest to you, that weren't listening to you.
Yeah.
That must be very difficult. Do you suffer from a rare disease, or do you know someone who does? If you do, I'd like to take a moment to point you in the direction of the Rare Disease Network. It's a private support group on Facebook where we bring together people with all sorts of rare diseases from all over the world. You'll find exclusive research and insights. You'll get the chance to ask questions to leading medical professionals, and you'll hear some engaging and inspirational stories from my growing community. There's a link to the group in the episode notes below. Why not click on that, and we'll see you there. Milly, I wanted to come back to what you said about your dreadful experience with the male doctor, because what you're saying was, I understand it, that he was the only person you could get the treatment from. So, are you saying you had to put up with behaviour, whereas perhaps in another situation you might have immediately reported it? Did you not report it because he was the only access to?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. To add insult to insult, not only was he the only access to the treatment that I could get. So for context, it was a Botox treatment. So migraine conditions are often treated with Botox injections to paralyze some of the muscles in your forehead and neck. That helps to, migraine's a very misunderstood condition, so it's very hard to say that helps to X, Y, Z, because you don't actually know what's causing it, but it has a proven correlation, if not causatory response, impact on your symptoms. But getting that on the NHS, you have to jump through a lot of hoops, and it's a postcode lottery. So getting the Botox injections privately is basically like paying for cosmetic treatment, which is not a cheap thing to do. Yes, he was the only place that I could get the migraine Botox done. You can get cosmetic Botox on any high street, but getting migraine Botox done and getting it not on the NHS is A, very hard to get hold of, and B, also a huge amount of money. So I was paying hundreds of pounds to be harassed every time I went to this man's clinic. But there's nothing that you can do. I just had to bite my tongue and deal with it. In a normal situation, I'd have kicked him in the crotch in the nicest possible way. But if I want the injection, I want to not be in pain. I want to function as a person. And that's horrendous to have to go through that.
And is that still the situation now? Do you still have to resort to him, or have you found somebody else?
No, so I was very lucky that after seeing him for a while, I moved to where I live now. And because I was in a different NHS trust, that meant that I could access a different neurologist. And now I have an incredible neurologist who has got me on to one of the most incredible treatments I've ever given access to, a monoclonal antibody treatment. It's very, very rare, very recent. And that meant that I didn't have to keep doing the Botox. So I was able to do this instead. So now I give myself a monthly injection, and I'm a lot less harassing than that was when it comes to injection. A lot more tolerable.
No, that must be a great improvement.
Yeah.
I'm sure people would be curious. I mean, did you report him in the end?
I didn't. I mean, what are they going to do? Like, you grow up as a woman and you report sexual harassment and you just get dismissed. Like, what are people going to say? That man's going to say he didn't do it, and I'm going to say he did, and they're going to say there's no proof, and I'm going to say, yeah. I just didn't really seem like a good use of my time when I could be focusing on all of the good things in my life that I can be doing. It's unfortunately the case that most sexual harassment situations don't go anywhere. So I didn't do anything about it.
Yeah, it's a sad shame, isn't it? That is how you end up. Very sorry to hear that. Very sorry. Milla, so what Milly just said there was not about the harassment. I'm moving on to the more positive aspect, which was that she finally found somebody who kind of understood and was prepared to do something about it. I mean, it sounds like you've kind of had similar experiences that you can go through a lot of frustration, and then suddenly somebody perhaps says something, or you meet somebody, and things suddenly change. So it sounds like your aunt was a great catalyst. But what about doctors? Were there any doctors who suddenly, saw things in a different way and made a difference for you?
Well, yeah, there was a general practitioner who just referred me to the right place and did his job. And I was, talking to a psychologist from like the county, the region, and then I went private because that's quicker, and it costs a little bit, but I didn't want to wait for a lot of time. All of the healthcare professionals in that scenario, they just did what they were supposed to do, and they did their job. And when I actually got the diagnosis, I had a lot of understanding from my parents because they saw it in a different light.
Right. Okay. Yes. So it needed that diagnosis for them to fully understand and accept the situation.
Yeah.
I want to talk now about sort of support networks. I mean, you've talked about your family, Milla. I'm interested to understand, perhaps come back to you, Milla. Do you use or have you joined any sort of Facebook groups for your condition or any of those sorts of things? Do you use that kind of social media support, or is it more, people that you know?
Yeah, I actually don't use social media at all. I think it's a hellscape. So I try and stay away from social media unless it's for business purposes. I promote my business on social media, but aside from that, I stay away from it. I did used to use social media, and I did look for some of those groups, and I wasn't able to find one that would work. But there's a great charity in the UK called the Migraine Trust, and the Migraine Trust put on a lot of informational webinars. They do a lot of conversations that you can join a Zoom call and ask questions of a specialist. They send out a lot of information, and that feels like being part of a network. But everybody's experience of a neurological condition is so different. I think it's really interesting what Milla was saying earlier about, like, I know that there's something in me that isn't what you are seeing. And I think that's the same of neurological conditions. You know your own body so well. I'm so insanely, intently in tune with what's going on inside my brain that no other person would have exactly the same situation. So I think even if you are talking to an organization or a member of an organization of people that have similar conditions, it's never exactly the same. And, you know, what might really work for someone doesn't work for someone else. So I think even if in my experience, I know not to discredit other people's experiences where they've had great success from support networks. But for me, I think it's just, I've accepted the fact that this is just a lonely existence in certain extents. I have a very great friendships and I have a great family and I have lots of people that I can talk to and spend time with. But when it comes to someone who really understands what's going on inside my body or inside my brain, it's just me. And that's one of the things that I really like about my current neurologist is that if I tell him something is happening, he believes that that thing is happening. Unfortunately, there aren't often things that we can do to fix that thing that's happening. We just actually listen to my own experience of my own body. And I think that can be one of the most frustrating and lonely things. So no, in answer to your question, I don't use any networks, but I do really like the information that gets shared from some of the charities. But aside from that, you just sort of get on with it yourself.
Right. Understood. What about you, Milla? Do you use social media?
I am part of some visually impaired and blind Facebook groups. I get out, like I'm part of a visually impaired youth organization in Sweden. And it is that's where I've met a lot of my friends. A lot of my friends are either blind or have low vision. For my neurodiversity, there's a lot of Facebook groups and stuff, but ADHD, 2 of my cousins and one of my uncles have been diagnosed. So I have those people to, look up to.
Okay, we're coming towards the end now. There's just one other subject I wanted to talk about. Milla, you said something really interesting in your email that you sent for the application. Yeah, you said if there's a cure or treatment on the horizon, such as gene therapy, would I want that for myself? I've got arguments both for and against, is what you said. So I was really interested to get you to tell us a little bit more about how you feel about that.
I mean, there are some scientific studies that have been done with my condition. There has been a lot of, there has been progress. There was one study where there was a gene therapy treatment of some sort. I don't really know the science behind it, but they used some sort of virus to transport some genetic material, and that was not entirely harmless to the people enrolled in that study. So they gained some functional vision, but the virus was, damaging in some sort of way. And ever since then, I haven't really heard of anything. But when I was, little, I was always like, oh, no, there's nothing wrong with being blind. I absolutely don't find any bad things about being blind. And it's just my life, and stop calling it a hard life because it's my life. But as I've grown older, I've realized that there's a lot of things I just cannot do. Just simple things like playing The Sims, like playing games on your computer and phone were very much a thing that I missed when I was a child. And right now, it's more of a go to the grocery store without anyone to support you. That stuff. But on the other end, this has been my life. I don't have a progressive disability. I don't have an acquired disability. I was born with my disabilities, and I have never known anything different. And if I could see, what would that do to my identity? What would that do to my perception of the world? And would I remember what it was like to be blind? And today I'm happy whatever happens, and I have accepted my life. But it was a very hard thing when I was 16 years old, and already a 16-year-old is already struggling with their identity.
What a fascinating answer. That's really interesting. Thank you for that. I can see the phases that you've gone through. What about you, Milly? Perhaps a little bit different for you, but I mean, what are your kind of hopes for the future in terms of research and cures and those sorts of things?
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of the treatments that I take, it's the monoclonal antibody treatment, works with a calcitonin gene-related peptide. So it's effectively like the closest thing to a gene therapy. And yeah, I love a solution. I'm a very solution-oriented person. I think I've become that way because when you live by yourself and you have a condition that is very much just yours, you have to figure it out. I also went to boarding school when I was 12, which I think teaches you quite a lot about independence. So I'm good at finding solutions to things. So if somebody said to me tomorrow, we can fix this, you just have to take this injection, you have to do this thing, I take it in a heartbeat. I think, yeah, it's a huge part of my identity, and I'm definitely proud of the person that I am today, and I like who I am, but this is a part of my life that I do not like. I don't want to have any of these conditions that I have. If I could get rid of them in an instant, I would. I'd take anything. I literally try anything. I've had the Botox, I've had the monoclonal antibodies, I had 2 piercings rammed through my vagus nerves in my ears. I have had a nerve block in the back of my brain. I had all the acupuncture. I have a medical marijuana prescription. That bit's actually quite good. But I would take it in a second. I don't want this for my life. There's so many days where this isn't living, this is existing. And that's not, there's so much more that could be. So yes, give money to rare conditions, give money to research, and, make it possible for people who suffer from the same things that I do to just, all I want to do is be normal. I don't think that's too much to ask as a person. I just want, give me all the drugs, give me all the injections, I'm on it.
Right. Okay. So you're happy to try whatever they come up with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Understood. Just come back on that same question to you, Milla, before we finish. Yeah. If something else came along, you expressed concerns about the other drug that you mentioned, but if something else came along, would you consider it?
Possibly, yes, because being blind can be really sucky at times. And there's a lot of things that I have to consider that non-disabled people don't have to consider. There's a lot of things that I need to think about an extra, and there's a lot of things that I struggle with because I'm blind. And yes, I would consider it. And I think it is an important perspective. We lift this concern, but I think I would probably get some sort of treatment if it was available. And I think it's a difference between different, conditions, disabilities, illnesses, because I've suffered with depression and anxiety. I grew out of my anxiety naturally. I was a very anxious child, and I'm no longer a person with that sort of struggle. And I'm very happy that my anxiety went away, because that was just horrible. And I'm on antidepressants because depression sucks. But blindness is a different thing, because that is something that it doesn't really cause me any physical or mental discomfort. So but yes, I would definitely consider it.
Understood. I'm going to give you both one final question. Try and end on a positive note, which we always try and do. So, you've talked about the difficulties, you've talked about the hardships. So give me one thing, would you say, if you can, that is a positive about your condition, about having your condition? Who'd like to go first?
I think a positive thing is that I see the world in a different way, and I can come with different perspectives that people are not prepared for. And just the sort of how I was very surprised that one of the girls at my school, I thought she was much older than me. And it turns out she and I were born the same year, but she, to me, her voice sounded like she was 29. But apparently she looked very youthful in like her clothing style and all of that. And I couldn't see that. So I think a lot of that is just I have a different perspective on the world than sighted people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You understand the world in a different way. Over to you, Milly. What's your positive?
Well, I'm a relentless overachiever, so I'm going to give you two. First, I would say I am tough as hell. I pick myself up and I figure stuff out and I get on and I can deal with a lot of stuff. I'm tough and I'm resilient. And then I would say secondary to that, it's given me a huge amount of empathy. Who knows, maybe I'd have been an empathetic person anyway, but I think when you privately suffer a lot, it's easier, in my experience, to understand how everyone is suffering from something. Everyone's got something going on. I approach my interpersonal relationships. I teach small business founders how to be good founders, how to be good employers, and how to work with people. And I teach them how to understand that everybody's got something and everybody deserves the love and the respect and the consideration of their own personal circumstances, because I've seen how difficult it is for me when I don't get that, and I don't want anyone else to have that. So I'm tough on the outside, but very soft on the inside.
I hear exactly what you're saying. What's a great note to finish on. Thank you. Well, that just about wraps it up. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation talking to both of you. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences so candidly. That's what I love about these podcasts. People do talk so openly. It's great. So if you, the audience, have enjoyed this podcast, well, let us know. Tell us your thoughts. Put your comments down below. We really would love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe as well to make sure you don't miss out. And share these podcasts with anybody else you think might be interested. We'd love to grow our audience some more. And also, we do have a Facebook group, which is called the Rare Disease Network, so you can always join us on there. Just before we go, something a little bit different. I'd like to just shout out to the people who make these podcasts possible. I'm just the guy who asks the questions, but beavering away behind the scenes are various people such as Lucy, Rachel and Thomas at LDA Research. They handle all the outreach and the administration. And also to Tom and the team at the 3-Man Factory, and they're responsible for editing and promotion. Thanks, guys, for all your hard work, because none of this would be possible without them. So we really appreciate that. So to everybody, thank you very much indeed for listening. We'll see you next time on Rare Together. And to Milly and Milla, thank you so much for your time.